Yo, what's going on guys, Cultimush back at it with a $700 gaming PC build. Now the total of this build actually comes to around $670, and if you use a couple of the mail-in rebates or if you look for sales, you could probably get this build for somewhere around $600. But for the sake of simplification, we'll leave it at $700. And I actually think this is a great price to spend on a gaming PC. I think that $700 to $800 is that sweet spot that you're going to get really good performance, but you're also not breaking the bank and getting, a $1,000 or a $1,500 build. You won't be maxing out every game at 1080p and getting 60 frames per second, but you'll be getting really good settings and really good performance on the latest games like Just Cause, Fallout 4, Metal Gear Solid 5, Witcher 3. All those games are going to be playing at really good settings and really good frame rates and much better than what you would be playing on a console. And the $700 budget is something that I've been being requested to do for a while now, since I think my last one was a few months ago. So let's get right into this. With the CPU of the build, I went with the Intel Core i5-4460. This is a quad-core CPU from Intel, and yes, it's not a Skylake CPU. You really can't fit a Skylake CPU for, a $700 budget. But this i5-4460 is still going to do a really good job. It comes at a great price of $175. Since it is just the i5-4460 and not something like a 4690K, it isn't an overclockable CPU, but considering it does come in at 3.2 GHz, that's still fairly decent. And the fact that it's about $50 to $60 cheaper than the aforementioned CPUs, the i5-4460 is a great fit in the build. And like I said, since it isn't overclockable, you guys can just use the stock CPU cooler and that will get the job done. Moving on to the motherboard, I went with the Gigabyte GA-H97M-D3H Micro ATX LG1150 motherboard. Now yes, it is a Micro ATX board, but it's still got all the features you want. It's on the LG1150 socket, it's got 4 RAM slots up to DDR3 1600MHz, up to 32GB of max memory. It's got RAID support, it's got 6 SATA 60 per second ports, so it's got everything you want out of a motherboard. It's coming in at a very cheap price of around $80 to $85, and it's going to be a great fit in the build. And it's not one of those more expensive motherboards that's around $115 to $120, so this is going to be a good fit in the build. The price is fairly low, so you are going to save some money, and it's overall just going to get the job done. So I highly recommend this motherboard for this build. For memory, I went with G.Skill Ripjaws X Series 8GB, 24GB sticks at DDR3 1600MHz at a cheap price of $43. Wow, that is a great price for 8GB of RAM. Just a year ago, this same kit of RAM was going for $65 to $70. Just kind of crazy to see how cheaper DDR3 memory has become. Since DDR4 memory is releasing, I assume that that's a bit of the reason why DDR3 RAM is so cheap. Regardless, for budget builds, DDR3 RAM is still the way to go, considering you're not going with a Skylake build, and $43 for 8GB of RAM is an absolute steal. And 8GB is a great amount to have in a gaming PC, considering the majority of titles these days are recommending 8GB. Even with a game like Star Wars Battlefront, that was a game that did recommend to have 16GB of RAM for whatever reason. I played that game having only 8GB of RAM, and that game ran flawlessly for me, so I don't know what that was about. 8GB is the standard right now, and considering how cheap it is, it's so easy to fit it in any build, even budget end builds like a $400 build, but obviously in a $700 build. Super easy to get, $43, great price. For storage, I went with the Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive. No SSD in this build. I know a lot of you guys might be like, what the hell? For a $700 budget, I just don't think it's efficient enough to get an SSD in your build. I'd rather get something like the Caviar Blue. You're getting a terabyte of space, and considering how big some of the recent releases have been, games like Just Cause 3 being 40GB, Black Ops 3 being 50 to 60GB, a 120 or even a 240GB SSD is not going to be enough for the majority of people. 1TB on the other hand, for most people, I think that is going to be sufficient enough, but hey, some people might even need more than a terabyte. You can check out some of the Seagate 2 or 3TB drives if that's something you want to go with. Otherwise, the Caviar Blue is a fairly solid mechanical drive. The speeds are decent. Obviously, it's not as fast as an SSD, but in a year down the line, SSDs are just going to be cheaper and you can pick up one then. For now, I would get the Caviar Blue 1TB for $50. For the GPU, I went with the Gigabyte Radeon R9 384GB video card for around $220. I have an R9 380 myself. I actually have an XFX model, and that does great in games. Played a game like The Witcher 3 at high settings at 1080p and was getting around 45 to 50 frames per second. GTA 5 ran really well. Metro Last Light ran really well. All the higher end games are going to run really well on the R9 380, albeit you're not going to be able to max out a game like The Witcher 3 at 1080p and get 60 frames per second. You can play the higher end games at really good settings. The game's going to look really freaking good, and it's going to be a frame rate that the consoles aren't even coming close to. And all of that for $220 is a really good option. And you can always overclock the video card as well if you want a bit more performance out of it, but out of the box, I think you guys are going to be happy with the kind of performance you're getting out of the Gigabyte R9 380. Moving on to the power supply, I went with the XFX 550W 80+ Bronze Certified power supply. This is about $55. It's a 550W power supply. It's going to power the build no problem. I'm not a fan of going for a crossfire configuration, so I would just stick with a power supply like this. If you do want more graphical performance in the future, you could just sell your R9 380 in the future and pick up something like a 980 Ti or 390, something like that. So this 550W power plasma is going to do a really good job, and it comes at a really good price of $56. Finally, for the case, I went with the Cooler Master Half 912 ATX mid-tower case. I didn't get a case with a side window on it because, frankly, the color scheme of this build is absolutely terrible, so I don't think you want to be showing that off to anyone. I really just focused on getting the most performance possible, so the color scheme did suffer a bit, and I don't think that's something you guys should be worrying about unless you're building, a $1,000 or $1,200 build. At this kind of a budget, stick with performance, and the Half 912 is a great case. I actually have this case myself, and it's been doing wonders. I've been using it for the last 3 to 4 years, and all my upgrades have been done in the Half 912, and it's just been doing a fantastic job holding everything together, and really, I don't think I'm going to upgrade my case for a long time. I'm just really happy with the Half 912, and I think you guys are going to like it too. So that's going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you have a request for a future video, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day. Peace out.